Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. Today I am going to give a first look to the SIGI light, the new SIGI feather. So I received the SIGI light 9 days ago and I fenced 6 days out of 9 with this weapon only, basically, to give you a decent impression, a decent review of this sword. But as you can see, this video is named the first impression of the SIGI light because I don't know for sure what I think about this. I can tell you what I think for now. And what I think for now is that I have mixed feelings about it. I need more time to try it out, so in the future, in a month or two, I will deliver you a complete review of this sword, which may be just the same thing I told today, or it will be a completely different review. But for now, as I mentioned, I have mixed feelings about this sword. Now, I will go through the various aspects as I generally do about this sword, and I will give you my opinion, my personal opinion, especially in the end, about what I think about it. So, first of all, safety. Now, basically, even a 10-year-old kid, by looking at the dimensions of this feather compared to our standard feathers, will probably say that this feather is safer. Now it is easy to see and easy to understand. It is safer on thrusting especially. Now when you are thrusting with this feather, it doesn't matter if you thrust in this way or this way or this way or whatever angle, whatever dynamic, the blade starts flexing. It doesn't matter the target also, so if you thrust at the opponent on the throat, which sometimes is a problem, especially with the wrong angle, even with other SIGIs, this one just starts flexing. So it is like 99.9999% safe in terms of thrusting, whatever is the target. And this, of course, is a feature which is present only, as far as I know, in these feathers, so in the SIGI light, even compared to all the other feathers which I tried out. Now, in terms of cutting, is a little bit different. So it's a little bit weird, let's say. When you receive a hit from this sword on the mask, you basically do not feel almost anything, I will say, especially if compared to standard feathers. Now, with standard feathers at the highest level of speed and intensity, you may risk concussions sometimes. Instead, when you are going all out with your cuts on the opponent's mask using this weapon, everything is fine. So it is far better in terms of cutting on the head of the opponent, which is beautiful. So it lets you do certain exercises with more intention when you are drilling with your partner, which is perfect. Now, when you receive a blow on the jacket instead, the pain that you feel depends from the edge alignment. So if the edge is perfectly aligned, you feel far lesser pain if compared to a standard blow of a standard feather. Instead, if the blow is not perfectly aligned even by a tiny amount of degrees, the blade starts to flex around on many axes and it tends to flick, basically. Now, this happens on a failed parry, which may be also a parry that would have worked with a standard feather, even in that conditions, but it doesn't work with this kind of feather. So this creates an effect which makes you feel more pain, fun enough, when you receive a flat hit in this kind of conditions, because it is kind of a slap effect. So you don't feel, when you are fencing with this kind of sword, you don't feel pain in your bones, let's say, but you feel pain on your skin. So it's kind of bruises, basically. And so it's not a problem in terms of safety, actually, at all. It is just a little bit of pain when you're fencing, which many of us are used to. And it is that kind of pain which is not serious. So in terms of safety, considering all these aspects, is extremely safe. So it is just a little bit weird that you receive more pain when you receive a flat hit or when you fail a parry or whatever, if compared to other feathers. At the same time, you basically have no risk of concussions. You risk far, far lesser in terms of broken bones or stuff like that, especially on the fingers. This kind of blade is very forgiving while hitting on gloves, sparring gloves also, which are the ones which I use generally speaking. So you feel the hit far lesser compared to a standard feather shred. So in terms of safety, is far, far, far safer than a standard feather. So the increased safety level brings another upside of this feather, which is a higher level of intention in the greatest majority, or I will say all your actions. So because the sword is safer and more forgiving in terms of blows, whatever the blow is, you can strike with more intention, which means also harder, with all your cuts, especially on the head, which generally speaking is not a great idea while fencing with a standard feather, which means that you can put more intention in your training, especially in your drilling and in your sparring, which translates in, let's say, better training on average, I will say, in the majority of the cases, and also to a degree, I will say, to a slightly higher technical level of requirements doing certain actions. So you can't force a lot binds with this kind of weapon. I am talking, of course, about fencing with this weapon against the same kind of feather, not against another feather, which to me doesn't make sense, honestly. So I'm talking specifically in all this video about fencing with a light feather against another light feather. So in this kind of conditions, anyway, you can't force a bind. You have to, generally speaking, go for a strong or weak bind because there is more flex, and you have to be precise in redirecting your edge against the opponent flat, ideally, but generally speaking, your edge against the opponent's sword, so you don't have, let's say, weird effects such as your blade bending when you're trying to gain the bind. So it requires more precision when you're trying to land certain actions, which in terms of training is pretty good and requires you to be more precise. Now, this comes at a price and have a variety of repercussions which may not be the one that I just mentioned, because it greatly depends what we are trying to do with this object. So if we are trying to recreate certain actions because we want to, it's fine. So if we want to play a lot in the bind with this kind of thing, it's very good. We try to do the proper thing, to align the edge in the proper way, etc., and overcome the problems that it may create when we do the thing in the wrong way. But it may also create the opposite effect. So as taking the bind is more complex and requires more skill, many people could go for the other way, so avoid binding, maybe. So this may be another outcome. So there are pros and cons. Anyway, back on track. So whatever is the outcome of this, this sword makes you able to fence with more intention and train with more intention, which is very good while drilling especially. And it is very, very good when you are teaching a frontal lesson. So in that case is extremely good. When if you are a teacher, if you are an instructor, and you used to do frontal lesson and you receive a lot of hits on your head, this is perfect. It is very, very good. It's the best training weapon around in these regards. Also on the part of the instructor, because you want to make the student do the exercise, and you have to do a lot of movements for a lot of time. Maybe the lesson is quite long, and so you want something light that you can use for a lot of time without getting tired, especially if you have a lot of students to teach to. So in this regards, very, very good. Now, maneuverability and how the sword feels, generally speaking. So this sword, as you can imagine, has unbelievably high maneuverability compared to other feathers. So it feels super light, and you can do things which, generally speaking, would sometimes even not work with a standard feather. So you can basically cheat to an extent if we compare the performance of this feather to the other feather. So very maneuverable, very easy to use, especially for people which are less muscular, let's say, than others. This feather is, of course, ideal. It's easier to handle on any single aspect for two motivations. So it is light, 1.25 kilos, and the point of balance is slightly closer to the handle. At the same time, because of this great maneuverability brought by weight and point of balance, this sword has lesser soul, I don't know how to describe it in another way, than other weapons. So I mean that this sword doesn't want to do anything in particular, in a sense that you are in command of everything, or almost everything compared to other feathers. The sword doesn't want to move in a very specific way when you are in certain conditions. So you don't have to compromise between what you want to do and what the sword should do in that conditions, which is something that honestly I find interesting while fencing with other swords, because you have to find out the proper way of using that sword in that conditions. Of course, this one has its own way too, which is many other things are possible. So generally speaking, many options are possible, many more than with any other feather, because it's light and you can recover from various conditions in many different ways. You are not forced to search specific mechanics. And at the same time, when you want to cut, the sword doesn't really want to cut, so you don't feel that the blade is, let's say, moving the cut forward. When you are accelerating the sword, you have to do all the work by yourself. So you have to propel the sword forward. The sword doesn't has a lot of momentum, and so when you start the blow, you have to keep pushing the blow forward for the entirety of the movement. At least this is what I feel compared to the sensation that I had while using my standard feather. Maybe if I fence only with this sword for 2 months, for example, I don't feel this kind of thing anymore. But by now, this is the feeling of it. Now, one of the things which I really enjoy of this sword actually is the fact that it is slightly shorter than the standard feathers. It is 130 centimeters compared to 135, which is the standard length of standard feathers. Generally speaking, I mean, it is probably the most used feather length, at least in Europe. This is slightly shorter, and actually it is part of why it is safer. Now, a longer blade and also a longer handle creates a kind of leverage which increases the speed of the weapon on the ending part, of course. The more the weapon is longer, the more during the act of landing the blow, the part which is farther away accelerates because of basically how physics works, and so the more damaging it is. Instead, a shorter blade, but generally speaking, a shorter sword decreases the amount of force that you receive during a blow. And so the, let's say, slightly decreased length of the sword helps improving the safety level. Now, I would go further and say that I would have loved this kind of tool maybe even on 125 centimeters. So if I have to fence with a very light weapon, I would prefer this exact weapon mass, or maybe 50 grams more, honestly, on a shorter, even shorter weapon, 125, 120 even. Because that's also part of what makes a weapon easier to handle. So a shorter weapon is, generally speaking, easier to move around, and it is slightly more forgiving while hitting with a blow, especially on the weak part. On the stronger, everything is strong when you receive it on the head, so it's different. But on the weak, which is not so far away from the point in which you are accelerating the sword, it's better, because, as I mentioned before, the shorter the weapon is, the lesser this part accelerates. So I like the fact that it is shorter than standard feathers. I would love it even a little bit shorter. So general impression of what I felt while fencing with it. So I already mentioned some things. You can go faster, you can put more intention in your strikes especially, and in your thrusts also. You feel safer. The most important part, I would say, is that you feel that your training partner is safe, generally speaking, in every single case, I would say, which is something very good. There are, generally speaking, lesser situations in which you say, oh, sorry, to your training partner, which is something good, I would say. So yeah, what I felt is that you can put more intention, you can go faster. Some exchanges are kind of hectic. For now, I can't even keep the pace with some exchanges because I am not used to it still. That's why I want to make another video in the future. So yeah, that's the impression that I had. Very fast, very forgiving in terms of damage. An interesting training tool, which comes with some downsides that now I am going to deliver you. Now, the first downside is that rationally we will say that because this weapon is safe, we can do the same things that we are doing right now, just at a higher level of speed and intention and whatever. And as I mentioned before, we can do certain action with a higher level of technique to make them able to land, such as binding and similar actions which require strong and weak, also parries, etc. We have to parry slightly wider sometimes because otherwise we receive a slap. So we have this kind of situations in which we have to be more precise if we want to fence in a clean way. At the same time, this doesn't mean that it is the only outcome of these aspects. So first of all, the flex can be exploited, which is a very huge flex, as you can see, on thrusting actions especially, during tournaments especially, because, I mean, during a tournament everything is legit as soon as it is not worded properly in the rule set. So this weapon flex a little bit more, I have to be honest, compared to my standard feather. I would say 1.2, 1.3 more. In my opinion, this is the increased level of flex while hitting with the flat, which someone can do on purpose, depending from the context. Now, it is not that everyone is training fencing to be perfect at fencing like on the manuals and whatever, and wants to do everything in the correct way, blah, blah, blah. Most people just want to win tournaments, and for example, now I also want to win tournaments. I would exploit the flex of this weapon in a tournament. Admittedly, if I want to win the final, yes. So I At the same time, I would not like to have this possibility because it will not force me for that kind of decision which becomes rational. So if you are in a setting which is competitive and ask you to do your best to overcome the opponent, you try to do your best, which means using every weapon at your disposal, and the flex of the weapon is one of those weapons. So doing a tournament, exploiting the flex would be very easy to see around. To overcome parries, especially on thrusting, but also on cutting. It would also be harder to judge for judges because the blade is thinner, and even now with a slightly wider blade, the difference between hitting with the flat or the edge is hard to judge for the average judge. It will be even harder. Ideally, you should look at the hands and the way the blow is delivered, but there are not a lot of judges which are doing it, so it is also more complex because you have to watch all together at the same time, so the blow and the way of landing the blow, which is not easy, admittedly. So this is kind of a little issue of this sword, in my opinion, if we will see tournaments with this sword, which I expect we will see, and relatively soon, because it's safer. So I am halfway between I am happy about this feather and I am not so happy about it. Because I am super happy because it makes fencing safer, it makes training safer, it makes sparring more easy to carry out. It makes also HEMA a little bit more accessible, even if I don't think it's the main goal of this feather. The main goal is to fence with more intention safely, in my opinion at the very least, but it will also create this side outcome which makes HEMA more accessible because it's lighter, and people don't like to get hurt, generally speaking, while practicing a sport. So, but it happens in every single sport, believe me. So yeah, these are the pros. The downsides are related to the tournament setting. I would like to see a tournament with these swords, and I mean, it will be closer to saber, an Olympic saber match. It will be far closer to a longsword match, of course, but let's say tilting a little bit toward Olympic saber to an extent. So the dynamics which we will see and the changes in terms of techniques and what is the better techniques, what are the better techniques generally speaking, would tilt in that direction too. So parrying would be okay. I mean, it will always be a component of fencing, but defending with distance will be a little bit more important. Parry riposte should be very, very fast. Suspended times, so like when you are parrying and then you see what the opponent is doing and then you decide to act, will be far less relevant in this kind of context with this sword, because the fencing is faster, generally speaking, and you have lesser time to see what is happening. Parrying needs to be wider because you don't want to get hit with the flex, generally speaking, especially in a tournament where no one will look at the fact that you have been hit with the flat or the edge. Who cares? So you want to parry wider, which makes feints more relevant, but at the same time parry less interesting because of the same motivation. And so most probably we will see slightly lesser parries than we see right now. Most probably, I'm not sure. it would be better, as I mentioned, to defend with distance while fencing with these weapons. It would be less relevant to go for binding actions because they are more complex to carry out, as I mentioned. So in terms of training, very cool. If something is harder to do, it's fine. But when you are competing, you don't want to do the hard thing. You want to do the easy thing because you want to win. You don't want to improve. So it's the opposite. Two completely different settings, two completely different objectives. And the same tool in two different settings with different final objectives makes for completely different outcomes. So it is a very good training weapon, but it's not a very good tournament weapon because it creates a lot of paradoxes which are boring. Fencing would be influenced by this in tournament. There is a cascade effect of the things I just mentioned, some of which I can reason and see already, other ones which are hard to predict because are effects of another effect of another effect, which comes after various steps of seeing what fencing is with this weapon, processing, changing idea, changing tactics, and so on. I will say that because this weapon is super fast, in relation also to our ability of perceiving fencing through our eyes, which is something fixed, which can't be improved over a certain level. We can all improve, to be honest, in HEMA, but just look at sport fencing, but only to a degree. So certain actions will become less relevant because of this, because like fencing is faster in relation to our, let's say, human abilities to perceive fighting. So yeah, I don't know in which way I need to practice more with this weapon, but this is something I am sure about. So I don't know what and how much it will change, especially in the tournament setting, remember, which also translates in training, because you want to train for the setting which are fencing, and so if this thing influences tournaments, then cascade effect influences training, and so you will start training in another way because you fence in another way in tournament, and you have to let's say, train for that kind of situation. Of course, many people do not train for tournaments, a number of people at least, but doesn't matter what you want to do as a person, generally speaking. The important part is what your club wants to do. So if your club is tournament oriented, you just fence in the way which is suited for tournaments. As tournaments are the final goal of the majority of clubs around nowadays, and it is a very good and important, in my opinion, objective which is carrying on HEMA and make it more and more widespread. We can expect that if tournaments are carried out with these swords, they will influence tournaments at first and then training later. So it's a very complex thing. I know that probably most of you will say, oh, but Federico is just another tool and there are many swords around, you don't have to overthink things, but it's not overthinking, it's just common sense. I have been around enough in the HEMA environment and I've studied also fencing enough to understand these kind of things. The process of evolution of sabers, for example, training sabers from 1850 to 1890 is more or less the same thing. So safer training tools, lighter, etc., for more or less the same motivations, and the outcomes are easy to predict also because you can look at the past and see the thing happening. So in conclusion, what I think about this. So I really like it as a training weapon because I can do many things which cold haven't done with a standard feather. I feel happy when I'm fencing with it, so it's fun. That's the first thing I said about this sword. It's very, very fun to fence with it because you don't carry too much about the safety of your opponent. But at the same time, it comes with all these things. So if it becomes the main training tool in HEMA, which considering how human nature works and also how our society works, a safer tool is better than an unsafe one, it may happen. And so, who knows? I like it on one side and I don't like it on the other. I am halfway. I am enjoying the practice with it. If it will be used as a specialist training tool in a club to train with intention certain actions, it will be very good. If it becomes the main training tool, I will fence anyway because I enjoy HEMA and I enjoy historical fencing. But I still prefer the way in which slightly heavier swords behave, even if they require a little bit more control when you are fencing. I don't know. I see value in both the things, but this one, the effects on the long term are weird, and there are a lot, easy to predict. So, who knows? Very weird review, I would say. That's why it is not a review, it's a first look on the sword. I will tell you more in the future about this sword. I think I will fence for 2 or 3 months before saying anything more about this sword. I want to be precise in the future review, and I want to tell you something that I am sure about 100%. Consider that I may change my idea on this training weapon radically in the next 3 months. I don't know, but for now, this is what I think. So, thanks for watching, people, as always. Remember to check my Patreon page, link in the description if you want to support me and the channel. Remember that this is my work. I just do HEMA and YouTube and the stuff that you know here on YouTube and on Patreon for living. So if you want to support me, I will be super happy. So that said, thanks for watching. See you next time.